Hi, Betsy. Welcome to Struggle to Strength.
Thank you, Mary Beth. Is so excited to be on your show.
I'm so excited to have you on the show. And we almost didn't even join the show because we were having so much fun catching up and talking in back on the backstage. Um, but now we are going to talk to you about how you have used vulnerability as a strength in your life and your business. But before we jump into the interview, I'm just going to quickly introduce myself in case anyone's joining us today who is not familiar with me or the show. So my name is Mary Beth Simone, and I am the founder and CEO of Niche Partnership Consulting. And I guide entrepreneurs and professionals through creating their contingency plan for their personal life and their business, so that they are prepared for the unexpected or for an extended vacation. And my business was spurred as a result of a personal struggle. And through this platform, my aim is to help people connect the dots between their struggle to strength stories, so that hopefully they can see their struggles a little bit differently. So, thank you so much, Betsy, for joining me for this conversation.
Well, thank you for having me. And I love what you just said about seeing your struggles differently. I think that that's so powerful.
Yeah, and we have been on this journey together for quite some time. So Betsy and I met through Speaking Your Brand's Thought Leader Academy. And we have stayed in touch and been at different events through the Thought Leader Academy. And so we have been on this vulnerability journey together. So I'm so excited to bring this conversation to everyone here, so that hopefully you'll be able to learn some different techniques and become more comfortable with vulnerability based on what you hear Betsy share. Um, so, can you tell us a little bit about your background and what you do for a living now?
Sure. So my career is all has been organized around the consulting and coaching industry. I realized the other day that it was like close to 30 years. So that's really making me feel super old.
Wow.
But yeah, so I've been in organization development starting back in like 1995 or so. And I was an internal consultant at Disney before I left and started my own business. But what drove me, similar to you, is there was like a crisis that led me to, leave my corporate job, which is when my dad died of lung cancer. And I had that existential crisis that a lot of people that I work with now have is, like I'm at that midlife, like, who am I? What do I want? And I don't want myself to be so identified, just with my professional identity. And so I just like made that big decision and I started a consulting business, but it wasn't like 100% bang on, like, okay, this is what I'm leaving corporate to start the exact same career that I had. So I went on this whole entrepreneurial path and it took me a long time to figure out like what I really love doing and what I really love helping people with, which is really helping them activate like who they are on the inside into their business models. Like I'm really good at drawing out people's strengths, packaging it, putting words to it. And it took me a really long time to recognize like this superpower that I had is actually my best path for monetization and what I love doing, what people wanted from me. So, that's what I focus my business on now. So I'm really focusing on like officially it's like I do branding, like personal branding, around like, okay, what's your value proposition? How do you fit in and stand out in the marketplace? But I think at a deeper level, it's really more like, um, authentic identity manifestation out in your business, like out in the world, which is why the vulnerability topic, kind of resonates a lot because, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But that's what I do now. So I do my signature program is my brand. I call it either like my brand messaging and positioning program, or I might call it my brand breakthrough accelerator. I have like a lot of names for it, but ultimately at the end of the day, it's figuring out like what makes you unique and how do you want to stand out in the marketplace and how do you put words around that so that you can, attract the right clients, that you could use the right words that will make the right clients like say, oh my gosh, you totally get me. I want to work with you, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I would say that my experience of your work is that you're able to dive into what someone wants to bring to the market, but they're like holding back. and hesitating. It's the part that they're shy about or a little uncomfortable about, and you're able to get in there and then pull that right out and teach them how to use that as a differentiator.
Mm-hmm. What you said, you're better at it. You framed it up perfectly.
And I see we have Sarah Wallace with us, and she says that she just found Betsy's podcast recently and always gets so much from it. And I do too, Sarah. Her podcast is excellent.
Thank
and
you.
I love yours too, Sarah. So Betsy, can you share with us what role vulnerability played when you were in the corporate sphere at Disney? What was your view about vulnerability? How did you use it or not use it?
I think it's really hard to use vulnerability authentically in a corporate environment. And there's a lot of reasons why I think from a healthy standpoint, you shouldn't. Like vulnerability. Okay, let me back up. And I would say one thing I've learned over the years is that vulnerability is a skill. So there's the word vulnerability is the ability to be wounded. And so you have to have a certain amount of skill sets you've developed, a certain sense of self that you can develop so that you can have that ability to be wounded, if you will. And the corporate environment, I don't know if it's really set up for that. I think a lot of us want to save corporate from itself and say, okay, we want to create these organizations where everyone can show up and be their authentic selves. But corporations are not designed for that. And it's almost like unsafe. I have this article on one of my blogs where I say employee engagement is unethical because that in order to really show up and give your heart, you need like a limbic brain on the other side. So companies are asking for employees to give up their hearts and minds and their motivation to a company that has no limbic brain that can give it in return. So there's like an inequitable power balance there. So when I would say like in corporate is, to me, the vulnerability would be is just simply find work that you really love doing and just stick with it and have the courage to have your voice and want the respect, like that you want to be able to get out there and say what you want to say and know how to say it in a way that resonates with other people. But there's some part where, like that openness, like it's interesting now when I go to other women's groups after spending so much time and speaking your brand and be working with people like you, where we've done all of this work, like we've gone in order to leave corporate and we've done all this work, like we're all in the same place. So I had that week that you and I spent together at that retreat where we're all showing up and we're being authentic, but we're all equally there. And then shortly thereafter, I went to a women executive event and it was like, wow, it's so interesting seeing all the women with the masks on. And I think some of it is that there has to be like the environment. So like there's a skill, and part of the skillfulness of vulnerability is knowing when and how to show up in that vulnerability. I don't know if that's making sense or not.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And I would say that I have similar experiences when I move between the different groups, like our public speaking group versus more corporate type environments. Yeah. So can we talk a little bit about, in your coaching work, what do you advise your clients about using vulnerability in their copy and with their clients?
So I want to contrast vulnerability with authenticity. Like vulnerability means is like I'm going to stand up and I'm going to show you like kind of like more of my wounds, like more of and I'm going to take bigger risks. So let's put them in two different categories. So when I help with my clients when we deal with their vulnerability, what I say all the time is it takes the same exact time and money and effort, investments, and everything from a marketing standpoint and a sales standpoint in order to create an on-purpose business versus an on-purpose business. There's only one incremental cost between the two, though, and that is the vulnerability, which means if I bring my real self out in the world, if I really do the business that I really want to do, like you have this podcast, it's totally to your heart. You have to put yourself out there and know that you might get those haters, or you might get some people who'll be like, oh, that doesn't make any sense. Or, you could have a different one. You could have like contingency planning is fun. And that could be your podcast. You'd still take the same amount of effort, but it just wouldn't be bringing your heart. So that's the vulnerability that you're bringing to the table. So it's around that taking risks and that ability to say, I'm going to try something, I'm going to fail. That's where the skill set is. I fall down, I get back up. That's vulnerability from that standpoint. Authenticity is a little different. So when I coach people, like what you were asking about, like within the writing or how they talk about things, it's just like talk like yourself. Like don't, like there's that third person lingo that a lot of people put on their website, would be like, Betsy Jordyn is a world-class consultant who has over 30 years in working in organizations. Like that's like I'm hiding and I'm not being authentic. I'm not talking in my voice. I'm not using my own language. Or I could say, hey, I've been in the consulting world for over 30 years and it's been super amazing. And now I want to help people work, create the kind of success maybe like I had, or maybe even better than the success I had. Like that's authentic. But then you don't want to go all the way over, like a lot of people to hire copywriters who, have those phrases like, look at you being all smart and stuff. And it sounds authentic, but it's not your voice. So that's not authentic either. So there's a little difference between, in my mind, authenticity and vulnerability. So authenticity means is I'm like just, I'm using my strengths and I'm using who I am and I'm going to get out there and I'm going to communicate directly and I'm going to use messages. I'm going to try it in somebody else's head and be able to express what they're saying in that. The vulnerability is I'm going to get out there and everything I do may not work. Every tactic, might not work, but I could live with that. I would rather try than fail, I'd rather fail by trying than fail by not trying, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes total sense. So now can we dive into what your experience has been with experimenting with vulnerability in public speaking and on your podcast?
You're so cute. You want to go straight for the hard stuff. Okay. So, I think that there's degrees of like how much are people aware of what their business is all about or whatever they're moving to the next level. Like I think the vulnerability is that I'm going from this phase of maturity or this phase in my business to the next phase. Like whenever we're doing step phases in something. So for me, going from not creating content at all to creating a library of content there, that was a vulnerability risk because I'd never done it before. So when I first started my business, I remember my first mentor like telling me like, I got to do videos. Like I'll never forget this one where, he's like, you're going to do videos. I'm like, I don't do videos. He's like, nah, you're going to do it. I'm like, okay, fine. I did whatever, I trust experts. So I'm like, yeah, I'll do the videos. And then I'm like, but I don't do teleprompters. And he's like, no, you're going to do a teleprompter and you're going to do a script. I'm like, no. And I'm like, fine. So I went and I wrote a script and then I gave it to him and we practiced it. And he's like, that's terrible. Go back up and write another one. And so then I went back up and I came back and then I wound up like with 7 scripts for this first video shoot. And, now my YouTube channel's done. So then I continue in that same vein, but it's all in that expert trap, like I'm writing about like my expertise, what I know about org design or strategy or whatever it is. But it's like I grew as a business owner and I got more clear of what my message is. And my message is really all about like bringing who the best of you out in the world and dealing with all of that kind of interior stuff is what my business became more about. So my content had to change. And so get pushed to that thought leader side, I almost wanted to die because now the real self, not the expert self that was part of my ego identity, but the real self in order to create that content had to come out. So it was almost like my protection strategy. Like what makes me really great as a brand whisperer, if you will, is I always felt kind of like invisible as a child and I kind of live in the invisible world. So I can like manifest the invisible world. But then in order for me to do what I needed to do, like I've got to become visible. And it literally feels like a death because my ego is connected to being invisible. I could hide behind anything for the best of them. I could hide in plain sight better than anyone, but then that was a hard part. So becoming a speaker, starting my podcast, like I didn't realize how much I would love podcasting. Like podcast is super fun, but I wanted to talk about what I wanted to talk about. I didn't want to talk about like, here's your 5 steps to this kind of stuff all the time. I wanted to mix it up and I wanted to talk about, what's really going on. And so it was, that was fun. I thought like the idea of trying to figure out what my signature talk was, it felt a little bit like a death because I think it was the death of my false self that was connected to my professional identity that I really wanted to get rid of a long time ago anyway.
Yeah. And now, I mean, your signature talks are wonderful. Your podcast is wonderful. And it's so interesting to think back that when we first met, I don't think you were doing much of either of those.
Yeah.
You had the YouTube channel, but yeah.
I
Yeah.
think but it's like I think it's like there's a vibrational level of where I'm at now. Like
Yeah.
I'm more comfortable. And the weird thing is like I spent all of this time, working with Carol, talking to you. I'm like, what's my big idea? What's my message? What's my story? I don't know what it is. And it's like Occam's razor. It's the one I keep talking about all the time. The whole idea like your best business and what you're meant to do is all based on how you're wired. And like I say the same stuff over and over and over again. But I'm like, that's not my message. I'm like, no, that's actually my message.
It is completely. And I heard on a recent episode you were talking about how uh, you needed to get more vulnerable with your history, with yourself, it as a way to, like, you, in looking back on how you met your husband, you see that there was a role in becoming more comfortable, with you, with your story, with your vulnerability, that was a way that opened you up to the experience of meeting your husband. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
I think that there's for sure a story on that one. And the thing that I was most afraid of, like if I become a speaker, people are going to find out I don't have all my crap together. Like I wanted to keep my professional image because it's like, it's not like everything's perfect, and I made so many mistakes, and I've gone through divorce more than once. And it was like, oh my gosh, if nobody's going to want me as a speaker because they're going to find out I got divorced more than once. Like, well, how humiliating is that? So I wanted to hide that story, and I wanted to hide the fact that, I've made really great decisions. Like it was the best decision I ever made to leave Disney and start my business for the sake of my kids. Like my kids are becoming an empty nester in 3 weeks. Oh yeah. So I'm going through all of that process. So anybody who's got like experience as an empty nester, please, in the comments feature, please give your advice, but but I was able to be there for my kids. But also, I made a bunch of other choices. So learning how to accept like my mistakes, my failures, like that's the vulnerability thing, is that I think I still, even though I know I'm attracted to speakers who don't have all of it together, and I question anybody who acts like they have it all together when I'm a listener to that. But for myself, I put that pressure on myself, and you were a huge help for that. Like soon as like I remember when we had our first meeting with the group, and everybody was talking about why they were there and what their story was. I'm like, everybody has something. Like everybody has something in there. And I remember specifically reaching out to you because you were very vulnerable with your story. And that was like, okay, then I'm like, I need to get your advice. And it was like helping normalize that. And I think that's what allowed me to be more open, is I could tell my story and I could talk about my failures, and it's not going to be the end of the world. Like, the sky's still shining, the ground did not open and I did not get swallowed inside there, that it will work. And if people don't like because I've made mistakes in my, romantic relationships, then they're probably not my people.
They're not your people, right? And that's totally fine, right? Like now, just as you're talking about that, I'm reminded of Pooja's quote when we were at the retreat, where she said, "Your audience has already been defined for you. They're already there and waiting," right?
Yes, I was thinking the exact same quote when I was saying
Yeah,
it. So you and I are on the same page.
yeah, yeah. Not for the first time. We're often on
Yeah.
the same page. Betsy, what advice would you have for people who are exploring public speaking, or even podcasting, and feeling like it's not safe to bring, their own personal stories to the platforms yet? How would you coach them?
So from a speaking standpoint, what I learned, what I walked away with the Thought Leader Academy is that what I thought was in my way was the way. Like the story that I wanted to run away from was the story that I needed to lean into. Like anytime you really want to run away from something, that there's truth in that and all the magic and the beauty. And you look at every single hero's journey, they always say it's like you have to face what scares you the most. So that is where there's stuff in there, but I don't think that you have to rush in there. So one thing for sure, if you are somebody who wants to become a speaker, I would be very careful about what kind of speaking coach you would get. So do not get somebody who is out there who's going to make you like a performer and, get leads from the stage, like don't get one of those. Like work with someone like Pearl who creates an environment and a community. Like that was the game changer, is I was surrounded by a bunch of women and nobody forced me before I was ready. Like I was able to take like a step and then get affirmation and take another step and get affirmation. And the fact that I had those fears. One of my clients right now, she's working on a business where it's about helping trauma survivors really create some sort of purpose project, that she could put out in the world. And she's that kind of mentor and guide, whether it's a book or a podcast or what have you. And we've been working on her brand forever, but the power of her brand is that she has the internal understanding. So she can understand how to make a creative project plus the internal thing. So Carol's a great example. Do not go to any of the others because they're just going to, if you go and you're trying to bring a vulnerable story, like I'm sorry. Can I add one other thing real quick?
Yeah.
But I'm going to pin in what I said. I'm going to go backwards too. That there's sometimes like telling your story is because there's some sort of wound that you want to convert into some sort of wisdom out in the world, kind of like what you were doing. So that's going to be like re-triggering your trauma. So you definitely need somebody from that standpoint. So there's somebody, like, I think that's what makes my business different is I understand the heroic journey that my clients are going through. So when I work with them on their branding, I'm dealing with their emotions at the same time, and I'm equally sensitive. Carol does the same thing, that Carol does that kind of speaking coach where she creates a community. We're going to be sensitive because I understand you're stepping outside. But if you're someone like one of my favorite thought leaders in the world is Monica Lewinsky, who's gone through, her whole platform is around cyberbullying, and nobody's gone through more pain around cyberbullying than Monica Lewinsky, and so for her to tell her story, there's the opportunity to re-trigger trauma. So do this in a way with a support system who's not going to be like, you could just get out there and you could just do it. Like you got to be much more compassionate with what it takes to do that kind of move.
Yeah. And Sarah, I think Sarah is in the Thought Leader Academy or just graduated from the Thought Leader Academy. So she's agreeing with the sensitivity that Carol brings to her coaching. And I think one of the keys for me is that I only talk about things that I have processed.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's like, it's so important, even though it may be a real eye opener for someone else to hear what I have to say. I have processed it. I don't feel sensitive about it any longer. Like I feel it from a place of strength and I'm ready to share. And so there's no rushing that process. Yeah, Sarah just finished recently. Yeah. So it is a very individual journey.
But I think one of the things like with my client is working on too is she says, like as you work through, this is what I love about what I do is I learn so much from people, that I'm
Yeah.
working with through their brand. But she would say is that you can sort of complete your healing process. Like you don't have to get out on stage, but let's say you want to write a book on something and it's like you're still kind of working through it. Like you can use the process of writing out whatever your speech is. You can write it. You may not present it yet, but through the process of writing it and speaking your truth, you will accelerate your healing. So you don't have to have I think it's like, I don't want to make it seem like you have to have all your crap together in order to make a step.
Yeah.
It's just that you have to be ready to be able to stand in it because like you're on a stage and if you're falling apart, you don't help your audience. So you have to kind of work it through. Or if you're coaching somebody, you can't need more from your coachee than, you need to be able to have that, but that doesn't mean that you can't. In fact, I think it will accelerate. That's what I believe around how I do my business build process is it's an action learning experience. You're going to become the brand as you create it.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And I do think that we can transform through the building of our brand, through the building of our signature talk, all of that. Of course, there is that we come from a place of being unsure whether we're going to be able to feel powerful when we get out there and we're giving our talk and we're sharing our brand. And yeah, through the process, we definitely become stronger and more powerful in that truth of what we're bringing.
Outside of like hiring the coach that it would be sensitive is I think also managing your expectations that it's not if fear is going to come and not if imposter syndrome is going to become, it's going to be when and how, what format. And so it's just like plan in advance, like it's coming, it's happening, and it's a sign you're on the right track. This is exactly what needs to happen. If you are not on the edge of your competency and your comfort zone, then you're not really in the right place. Then you're just like dressing up your old stuff in a new outfit.
Yeah.
So then that's another good sign.
Yeah. That's great advice. That's great advice. So, Betsy, let's just switch gears for a moment. Is there anything that you are promoting in your business right now that you'd like to share with the audience?
One of the things that I'm working on right now that is going so well is I have a couple new services that I have added onto my signature program. And one is really working on the copywriting process. So, one of the things that a lot of people hate is writing copy for their website and writing about themselves. It's like a huge challenge. And I resisted doing the actual copywriting because I thought, well, at some point, if you're going to be a business owner, you got to learn to write. But a lot of times, because it's so personal, and writing it and not knowing how to do marketing copy is really hard. So I created a new process where I interview my clients. So I work with them through their branding. I really own, like I not own, they own it, but I internalize like, okay, this is what it's about. Then we work through like, what kind of messaging they would want on their website. And then I have a copywriter who turns all of that into copywriting, like at least they get the first draft. And the reaction my clients are getting is like just so huge because it's so validating. Now, I have another service that if you want help working on your blogs or your podcasts or any of your content, because I love ideas and I love content, I have a different program and I'll teach you more about writing, at that point, but it will be in a different context once your website's written. So it's like I've reduced the pressure of the learning curve. And now it's like it's been so powerful and it's been so interesting. Like that client I was just telling you about, we worked on the copy process for her. And when she got it, her copy from us, she started crying. She's like,
Oh,
not in a, in a very like, I've been working on this for so long. I've been trying to do it myself, but having you mirror for me what my business is all about and having somebody else mirror for me and give me these words and for me to see it like this, it's like I finally see what I've been wanting to, that has been in my head for all of this time. And then I have an amazing graphic design team, that's pairing those words with images. So that's just, adding to it, but just seeing those words, it's like, oh, it's been really powerful.
oh, that sounds wonderful. Yeah, and
Yes.
Sarah says the struggle of copywriting is real. Yes,
It
it
is.
is.
It's so real because first off, we're not trained to write copy. We're trained to speak in corporate or academic, and which is the opposite of copywriting. And
Right.
then you're wrestling again, like the level of the imposter syndrome that comes up when you're doing copywriting. So it's like I'm just reducing the pressure where it's like you figure out what you want to say, we'll help you figure out how you want to say it. And and then together we're going to get it done so that because otherwise it just goes on and on and on. I don't know if you've ever
Yeah.
done websites, but getting copy is what makes the process go on and on and on. Businesses don't get launched. People are not, and they don't even get the bang on businesses because if your copy's confusing, the client's going to get on it. I'm like, I don't know if I'm supposed to be here. Like
Yeah.
you're going to get hit or miss results. So I'm like really passionate. Like I'm really in the zone of knowing like my superpowers in the words. Like I'm going to get you the words to describe the value of what you do. I'm going to get you the words for your networking event, the words for your proposals, the words that's going to connect your heart to your client's hearts so that everybody, so win-win, for everybody.
That's awesome. And can you share with us a little bit about your podcast?
Oh, you're asking all kinds of fun questions for me. So my podcast is called Enough Already, because again, that a lot of the people don't believe that they're enough for their purpose and what they want. So I kind of have like enough already. It's like enough already, that kind of thing. And then you're enough already. Let's do this. So it's really all about helping people find like the courage to build a purpose-driven consulting, coaching, speaking, anything like a personal brand kind of business. And so we explore lots of different topics. So I typically will take a topic like right now we're in the middle of I have a meta series I'm in the middle of around like, how do you tap into the heart and mind of your ideal client? So I've been working on the ideal client archetypes. But since I work with a lot of consultants, I decided I'm going to interview some of my favorite executives. And I brought them on the show so that they could hear straight from these executives, like, well, what are they looking for in a consultant or coach? Or why would they hire somebody? And so that's been a really interesting process. I have like my solo episodes, but the interviews have been really fun because it taps into like that qualitative researcher background. And I'm seeing these themes, like what makes a great executive is the same thing that makes a great consultant, which would make healthy organizations is they're all systems thinkers. But they all come at it from different angles with their different personality types. So, and that's another part of what I do is the stuff with the different kind of archetypes and different kind of personality, strengths-based focus, and all of that. So that's been super fun. So
That's
much
awesome.
fun.
Love your podcast. And what is the best way for the audience to connect with you if they want to learn more about you?
Well, you could just go to my website, www.betsyjordyn.com. You could check out my story, my services on there, my podcast is on there, my blog, or you could head on over to YouTube. I got a ton of videos. Some of them are you'll see the difference between my older videos and my newer videos around when I was in the, expert trap and then how I've moved. You could see my evolution as a thought leader on my YouTube channel because I got a lot of old ones. I look a lot younger in a lot of the older ones too. So you'll see that.
And I'll add
aging
links.
online.
Didn't expect that part of the business, huh? I'll add links to all of those resources on LinkedIn so that people can connect with you. Thank you so much for joining me today, Betsy. I think that your perspective and your what you have to share with us is so valuable and really helps people to get a better sense of where they stand with vulnerability in their business and in their content.
And back at you. Like if anybody, it's not just the contingency planning that I would highly recommend Mary Beth for, but if you need a thinking partner who's going to help you be comfortable, like with your own struggle to strength story, like you've been a huge, huge accelerator for everything that I've been able to up level in my content and my thought leadership. I would not have been able to make that leap as fast, of course, with Carol, but you personally, like that, the conversations and the coaching I got from you are invaluable.
Thank you so much, Betsy. I adore you.
As you. And turn right, turn right.
All right. Well, that's enough for today. And we'll see you next time on Struggle to Strength.